We've got a lot of established wide receivers who are falling apart at the worst possible moment, but the good news is we've got a lot of new blood at wide receiver who are peaking at the right moment. So people need to stay open-minded about how they proceed to their fantasy playoffs. Make sure to go down there, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel to show your support, because I'm doing everything I can to bring us all home titles this year. Now, our first two tiers, I don't think we have much to worry about. Starting out with tier 1, we've got JSN at number 1 and Jamar Chase at 2. So JSN, don't overthink this one. He had a bad game, and it was his only bad game of the entire fantasy season. You cannot look at JSN as a guy who's just falling apart. He is a guy that's on pace to break an NFL record still, and he has just been fantastic. Going to Atlanta in a dome game to take on the Falcons defense, that feels like a slam dunk matchup to me. Jamar Chase, you have nothing to worry about with him. With Joe Burrow back in business now, and even when they get T. Higgins back, it's just going to open up Jamar Chase's opportunities massively. And he's going to Buffalo to take on the Bills, who easily can be beaten through the air. Just don't look at the Steelers to do that for you. Jamar Chase in this matchup against Buffalo, I want all in on this one. And if you have Jamar Chase, you should be really happy heading into your playoffs. Dropping down to our next tier, we've got George Pickens at 3, and Davante Adams is actually at 4. So these two guys, I made the switch with George Pickens last week over CD, and of course CD has a better day. But I don't really think it matters that much because my rankings are still going to be like this. I view George Pickens as the superior fantasy option moving forward because I think his ceiling is 30 plus points. I don't know if I can get that from CeeDee Lamb at this point this year because CeeDee has been dropping a lot of passes. He's also just been playing second fiddle in a lot of cases to George Pickens. I do think of George Pickens as the superior option still. At Detroit, the matchup is very beatable on Thursday night. Should be a good one for both options. Davante Adams, if you just look at things logically, and you say to yourself, okay, Puka is a really big target guy. It's not like Davante doesn't get a lot of targets, but he is so dominant at the red zone, you may be a little more hesitant to do this. And I was hesitant for a while to make this switch. But I view Davante Adams as basically a lock to get a touchdown every single week. With Puka, it's kind of like pulling teeth to get a touchdown. So to me, I'd rather have Davante Adams one spot over Puka in the rankings, and Puka's still good. Like, I think Puka is a great fantasy option moving forward. Going to this Arizona matchup, they'll both do well, but I do think Puka at this point has to be viewed as a lesser than option in the Los Angeles Rams wide receiver room because he just doesn't get the touchdowns that Davante does on a weekly basis, and sometimes it's 2. And then CeeDee Lamb, like I said, I view him as still a dominant fantasy option when he's on his game. But he has been off his game several times this year, and you kind of don't know when he's going to be on it. I know that they just had a massive push to get him the ball against the Kansas City Chiefs, and it worked out really well. But if you look at the duration of the season, he has had a lot of down games for his standards. And that's why I just prefer Pickens over CD at this point. CD's still great. It's still a great matchup. He can still do great things. But I definitely prefer Pickens in this offense. Jameson Williams at number 7 and Nico Collins at number 8. So Jameson Williams versus Dallas, the matchup in theory should do very well for him. The Cowboys' one weakness now with their defense is not their pass rush. It is not their front 7. It is their secondary. That is their weakness at this point. And without Amon-Ra St. Brown, which I guess he's still a game time decision, I don't think he's going to go. Jameson Williams without him has massive upside, and that's why he belongs in tier 2 at number 7 at the very least. And the only reason he's down here this low is because you still never know with Jameson Williams. But I will say this, if you have him, he should absolutely be going in your lineup this week. Nico Collins at number 8. Going to Kansas City, and Rashee Rice is at 9. So with Rashee Rice, it's a lower ranking than usual. And the reason I prefer Nico this week over him is because I can see the game script going a certain way that benefits Nico more than Rashee Rice. I think this is a lower scoring game, and Houston pulls Kansas City down to their level of offense. And that works for Houston. Houston does have an emerging wide receiver to Jaden Higgins, who is helping Nico Collins get more open. And I do think Nico is obviously such a great player that in this Kansas City matchup against a defense that hasn't done nearly as well as they have in previous years against the pass, I do think Nico could take advantage probably more than Rashee Rice can this week. I think of Rashee Rice as a great player most weeks. I do not think this is going to be one of his better weeks, though. This is a statement breaking more than anything. He has to take on one of the toughest corners to play in the NFL in Derek Stingley. And matchups versus corners are massive, particularly this time of the year. I am not telling you by any means to bench Rashee Rice. I'm not telling you that you should be trying to get away from Rashee Rice moving forward. This is a unique matchup that I do not think highlights Rashee Rice in big ways. I think Rashee Rice will still be fine. He'll get a lot of short targets that, kind of even out his overall score, but I do not think of this as a great matchup for him. So I would play Nico over Rashee Rice, but I want to put it to the test. I want to go to fsroundup.com, our site right now, and make a start-sit poll between these two guys. So I'm going to type in Nico Collins, then I'm going to go to chat, and then I'm going to go to start a poll for week 14, and I'm going to add Rashee Rice onto this, and I want you to go vote on this one honestly, because I'm very curious to see where everybody else lines up in this one right here. It's completely free to vote, completely free to start your own poll. And if you want access to my top 250 rankings on a weekly basis, you want access to the automatic waiver wire, which is saving leagues this year and winning leagues, and you want access to the comparison feature and the league sync up feature, that is with the premium subscription. And if you refer a friend, you and your friend get an entire first month free. And if you just want to do a full team breakdown for me where we can discuss on a live stream back and forth dialogue on ways to make your team better and ready for a playoff run, you can also do a team breakdown with me as well. Dropping down to our next tier, Terry McLaurin makes a illustrious return inside the top 12, and Chris Olave is at number 11. So Terry McLaurin goes to Minnesota, takes on the Vikings. I don't fear this matchup like I used to because I've been on this all year. The Vikings defense is actually good. The problem with them is that their quarterback situation is so tragically awful that their dam breaks on defense. And that's just natural with any NFL team. And Terry McLaurin, in his first game back, was dominant. And that was with Marcus Mariota. There's a chance that Jaden Daniels plays this week. I don't know if it's going to be Marcus Mariota again, but it could be Jaden Daniels. And if that's the case, then I want him here at 10 because I think his upside is really, really big. They've been missing that explosive piece on their offense. Chris Olave at 11, going to Tampa to take on the Bucs, who are very, very susceptible to big games from wide receivers in fantasy. Chris Olave should have had a much better week last week as well. He dropped a surefire touchdown pass. I mean, it was so bad, and that's always kind of been my problem with Olave, but the bottom line is most of the year, it has not been that way. Olave has been a much better fantasy player than he has been in previous years, with all things considered at quarterback and the rest of their talent surrounding him. So I do still think of Olave as a dominant target in the offense who probably won't drop many more touchdown opportunities like he just did last week. I'm sure he's getting lambasted in the film room this week in practice just based on that touchdown pass alone. I'll imagine he'll come back and have a good one. T. Higgins at 12 and Drake London at 13. So both these guys are questionable. We don't know if they're going, but I'm going to rank them as if they're playing this week. And with T. Higgins at Buffalo, if he's there, I want in on this matchup. It's pretty simple. I mean, I do view this matchup as one of the best for fantasy football of the week, and T. Higgins has always the potential to go off for a massive game, particularly with Joe Burrow. And Joe Burrow being back is going to change this offense's trajectory from a fantasy standpoint the rest of the year. If you held on to Bengals players during the absence of Burrow, you're about to get paid off in a massive, massive way. I think that this matchup is fantastic for Cincinnati and fantastic for T. Higgins. Drake London versus Seattle, this matchup is not good. And in his theoretically first game back from injury, I don't think it goes fantastic. That's why he's at 13, because ordinarily, if you had Michael Penix and if you had a good matchup, he'd be somewhere closer to the top 5 than the top 10. But Drake London is in this position to where if he comes back, you never know what his target share is going to be in his first week back. Probably high, but still, it's a bad quarterback. It's a bad matchup. I have to mitigate the risk a little bit by putting him here at 13, but I do think that he obviously has potential to go off for a massive game anytime he plays. Dropping down to our next tier, we've got Ladd McConkey at 14 and A.J. Brown at 15. So with Ladd McConkey in this matchup versus Philly, I said this yesterday on the kicker rankings. I believe Justin Herbert plays in this game. He's a tough SOB. He usually plays through injury. And just because it's his non-throwing hand, it makes it a lot less significant. And if you want to point out to me, well, Aaron Rodgers is playing with a broken wrist in his non-throwing hand. Well, yeah, Aaron Rodgers is 42 years old. Justin Herbert is in the prime of his career and can move. So I don't think it's the same thing. Sorry, I think Ladd McConkey versus the Eagles is obviously not an ideal matchup, particularly after 2 straight losses. But maybe that's the crux of the issue is Philly is getting more beatable because their offense isn't moving the ball consistently. Either way, if it's Justin Herbert, you definitely want the number 1 wide receiver in this range, and that number 1 wide receiver is, of course, Ladd McConkey. A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. They continue to be back-to-back ranked. A.J. Brown, I will say this. The one thing with him is that the last 3 weeks, he has been targeted more than 10 times. So I do think there's definitely a push to get him the ball more. And against the Chargers defense, it is a beatable matchup. So they both rose up while also acknowledging that both of them will not finish inside of the top 20. They both will not do that. It's either one or the other. And Devonta Smith, even with A.J. Brown's increased target share, he still has a very stable target share of around 7 to 10 or 11 targets on a per game basis. So I don't want to view him as this lesser than option all of a sudden just because A.J.'s had a good stretch. I don't think it's like that. I think that Devonta Smith is still a very high upside option who can get you 30 points in any given week. So he's going to continue to be back-to-back with AJ at this point. I just have both of their upsides raised a little bit this week because of the matchup. Michael Pittman Jr. is at 17 and Emeka Egbuka is at 18. So with Michael Pittman Jr. going to Jacksonville to take on the Jags, I view this matchup as more of a field goal fest than a score-happy fest with touchdowns. So I do have to mitigate risk by putting these players in this matchup a little bit lower. And Michael Pittman Jr., I've been discussing all season. What bubbles underneath the surface is that his target share has been inconsistent and just low at times. In this week with Daniel Jones, with this broken fibula he's dealing with, had his worst game in fantasy. So I kind of am a little lower on Michael Pittman at this time of the year. Same with Emeka Egbuka. This is a guy that I've been saying for a while now has been a wide receiver 1 in fantasy the whole year. And I stood by that for a long time. I'm worried. I'm really worried. I think it's a combination of a lot of things. Baker Mayfield not being 100%. I don't think Emeka Egbuka is 100%. Chris Godwin coming back into the fold. Tez Johnson breaking out. The possibility of Mike Evans coming back. It's all creating this perfect storm for Emeka Egbuka to be worse off in fantasy. Now, this matchup, it's a good one, but he had a good one last week, and he's dropping passes, and he's still getting targeted like crazy, so I've got to keep him inside the top 20 because I believe in the ceiling still, but the floor at this point has really destabilized to an unstable point where I can no longer call him a must-start in every situation. Dropping down to our next tier, Jakobi Meyers is on the rise. And Jalen Waddle is at 20 this week. So Jakobi Meyers is one of those wide receivers, as I said, is on the rise. I needed last week to determine what I ultimately thought about Jacksonville wide receiver options with Brian Thomas Jr. back in the fold, along with Brenton Strange. And I got my answer. Jakobi Meyers is that number 1 now, and it's not even really close. Versus Indianapolis this week, the matchup, in theory, actually should be better because of an Achilles injuries to Sauce Gardner and Charvarius Ward still not active as well. So I think Jakobi Meyers actually is in good position moving forward with this team to get a consistent 8 targets per game and possibly be their red zone threat moving forward because Brian Thomas Jr. has been so bad. So he is one of those guys that if you've been going with a lot of other wide receivers this year, you might want to consider playing Jakobi Meyers over someone like Justin Jefferson moving forward. Jalen Waddle's at 20. I think he is what he is. Like, there's going to be weeks where he's most of the time higher ranked than this, but it's in New York, and I don't like that. Now, this Jets matchup, in theory, it's fine. I would love this matchup if it was in Miami, but in New York, I've been calling this out, and I've been right every step of the way. with Dolphins players. You take them out of their element, you give them cold weather, they're not good, and that's their worst days offensively. So this one in New York in December, I kind of want to stay away from. I do not think it's one of Waddle's better games, but this is not an indictment on Waddle the rest of the season. I think he will still have good upside games in fantasy football, but this is not one of them. Marvin Harrison Jr. at 21 and Christian Watson at 22. Marvin Harrison Jr. exited the game with a heel injury. We don't know if he's playing. This guy just can't stay healthy. And the bottom line is, I do think he's the wide receiver one. So when he's active and available, I would say he's the best option in Arizona. But this matchup against the Rams, not great, obviously. They're coming off a bad loss. They're going to want to take it to the Cardinals. I still think that Marvin is a high upside play, and the floor is really solidified to a really stable point with Jacoby Brissett. But I can't rank him super high this week because I don't think the matchup is really one that you want to take advantage of in every situation. Christian Watson, another riser. I would play over Justin Jefferson. I would play over Cortland Sutton, DK Metcalf, Rome Odunze, guys like that. I think that Christian Watson has stabilized to a point where he is getting targeted all over the field. It used to be he was just a deep threat and a big play threat. He's become more than that this year. They have used him in short routes, intermediate routes, and of course he still gets deep targets. Now, he doesn't always catch the ball, but the point is that he's very utilized all over the place in this offense. So versus Chicago's defense, who has been injured on the back end for sure, and injured on the entire defense, it is a matchup that you could still take advantage of. The only thing that's going to change this potentially is when Jaden returns. And maybe Jaden comes back this week, but I don't think in his first week back, it'll affect Christian Watson that negatively. Dropping down to our next tier, Deebo Samuel back inside the top 30 at 23, and Justin Jefferson finally lands at 24. Deebo Samuel at Minnesota in this matchup versus them. Like I said with Terry, it's a matchup that in theory it shouldn't be good, but just because of their quarterback situation, the offense as a whole, it is a good matchup because the dam will break. And if it's Jaden Daniels, I want two options with wide receivers for Washington. Now, we don't know for a fact that it's going to be Jaden Daniels, so obviously watch this one throughout the week, but I'm projecting he plays this week. So maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, but if he doesn't play, Deebo probably still maintains top 30 because if you kind of look at his floor and ceiling ratio, it's been basically similar to Justin Jefferson's, except with a higher ceiling. Because with Justin Jefferson versus the Washington matchup, it's fine in theory, but this guy is dealing with awful quarterback play, and you can see the guy's just shutting down. I mean, this guy, how could you blame him too? I mean, his quarterback situation, it's not just subpar. It is a disaster, an unmitigated disaster, and obviously Max Brosmer was not the answer, and J.J. McCarthy is playing again this week. Either way, man, I don't know how you can look at this and say you want to play him in your playoffs. Just because you drafted a guy number one does not mean you should play him through your fantasy playoffs. If he has been this big of a disaster for you, you need to consider guys like Jacoby Meyers, Christian Watson, Deebo Samuel plays over Justin Jefferson this week. Quentin Johnston at 25 to round out this tier. In that Philly matchup, if it is Justin Herbert, QJ still has that upside. But of course, if you look at his floor and ceiling ratio, it's been a little bit lower since he got injured a couple weeks ago. So you can't consider QJ just this constantly great upside play because his upside realistically has not been 20 plus points in a while. I think it's still there, probably just not in this matchup. But I do still think that with Justin Herbert, you want two wide receivers in this offense, and I would say that these are the two that you want right now. Dropping down to our last tier, Troy Franklin is still at 26, and Alec Pierce is at 27. Troy Franklin actually kind of falling backwards a little bit. I still do think of him as probably most weeks wide receiver one because of the chemistry he has with Bo Nix and the amount of times he's on the field. I still do consider all that stuff very stable, but I will say this, it's destabilizing a little bit with the emergence of Pat Bryant and Cortland Sutton's big week that he had against the Washington Commanders this past week. That being said, it's a matchup you want to take advantage of against the Raiders. You do have two Denver wide receivers inside the top 30 in my rankings this week, with Troy Franklin still being the wide receiver one. Alec Pierce at Jacksonville, another riser. And really, this guy has been here all year. in this range. Like, he has the upside to give you 20 plus points, and his floor, while low, is not that much lower than a guy like Justin Jefferson. Now, again, if this matchup was better, I would have him ranked over Justin Jefferson probably, but this matchup I don't like. I think Jacksonville's secondary has been pretty good this year. It's also just a situation where I feel like in this divisional matchup, to determine who's the 1 seed in the division, it's going to be more of a slugfest here. So I'd probably stray away from Alec Pierce this week, but he's earned a spot in the top 30. Courtland Sutton at 28, and Rome Odunze lands at 29 this week. So Courtland Sutton rides back in the top 30, and that's because the guy's a really good big play threat. And he always has been that. It just hasn't been stable with targets lately. And this ranking is very unstable. It's a very fluid ranking because I could easily see it go backwards again for Courtland Sutton. But the matchup is so good that I'd rather play him over guys like Zay Flowers, who's been consistently lower. Keenan Allen, I would say the same thing. DK Metcalf, I would say the same thing. And Brian Thomas Jr., I would say the same thing as well. Rome Odunze at 29 at the Green Bay Packers. Matchup in theory, not good. And Rome, if you look at the game log, man, it has not been good. I mean, I was really in on Rome after his big first month, and I thought he was the wide receiver 1 with massive upside. We haven't seen that since then. I mean, he's just not been a consistent player. Caleb just doesn't target wide receiver 1s into oblivion like a lot of quarterbacks do. Guys get schemed open, whether it's Luther Burden, DJ Moore, or Rome Odunze, and sometimes Caleb doesn't even hit him. Caleb is still not the most accurate player, and in this matchup, man, I just don't have much excitement anymore for Rome, while also acknowledging I still do think he's the better option in fantasy in Chicago out of the wide receivers. Khalil Shakir at 30. Man, it's just hot and cold with him. You'd think in good matchups he'd be really good, but there's been 2 opportunities this year against Tampa and against Pittsburgh this past week where he's been just completely irrelevant. In the Steelers game, I will say this. He was relevant. He just dropped a touchdown pass. That was the problem that Khalil Shakir had. Most of the time, he's a good, sure hands player. And against the Bengals, I do view it as a matchup. Again, I just rather take over certain guys below him, but I do not have a lot of confidence in this play either. So let me know what you think of the rankings in the comments below. And if you want to see the top 12 kicker rankings for this week, click on this video right here.